right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Bourbon Showdown Podcast. My name's Jesse Jones, and on the show today, we have the man himself, Mr. Eric Bischoff, joins us on the program. You would know him from WCW, from WWE, from the Monday Night Wars, but I know him as somebody who likes to drink whiskey, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk whiskey, we're going to talk wrestling, we're going to talk television. He's a smart guy, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed picking his brain about how he got started, how he built the illustrious career that he has built. He's a smart guy, so if you pay attention, you might just learn something, because we're going to talk Four Roses whiskey. That's what we're drinking today. We're going to have single barrel Four Roses. We're going to sit down, we're going to pop the top, and we're going to take some sips, and it's a damn good time. So I'm not going to waste much time up top today. I would ask you, if you would please go hit like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Instagram, all the places that you like to listen to us. If you would please just go hit like and subscribe, and we're going to get this thing started right now with Mr. Eric Bischoff on the Bourbon Showdown Podcast. My name is Jesse Jones. Let's start the show. All right, we are here today with the man himself, Mr. Eric Bischoff. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing very, very well. Thank you for asking. Hope you are too.
Oh, I'm doing phenomenal. I have been so excited about today, and even more so with your whiskey selection. I was very happy when you were like Four Roses single barrel. I'm like, that's a phenomenal pick.
Yeah, I discovered Four Roses about 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And it was a fun discovery, first of all, with a lot of history behind it. And I've been enjoying it ever since.
Well, I told the master distiller that was your pick, and he said, that's awesome. He was very fanboy about Eric Bischoff was drinking his bourbon today.
Wait a minute. Is that master distiller Brent Elliott?
That would be him. Him.
His name's on the tag.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, Brent, how are you, buddy?
He is a good
my
dude.
New best friend. Get my address from Jesse.
He's a good guy, and it's funny because all of the single barrels, he was telling me a little bit about them, that he hand selects every one of them. So it's not like a mass production. Like each one only turns over about 200 bottles, which I thought was pretty cool, because you know how much money they're leaving on the floor just to make sure they get the absolute best product for each bottle if it's only bottling 200. I always think, go ahead.
It's pretty amazing. It really is. But I love the product. Let me back up just a little bit, because I live in Cody, Wyoming, which is, as they say, the rodeo capital of the world, and on the doorstep of Yellowstone National Park, just to paint a picture for you. But about 30 miles from here, there's a little town called Meeteetse. Believe it or not. I don't know what the population is, maybe 400 or 500, maybe more. I don't know. It's a very small town, though. And there's a bar there called the Cowboy Bar. And it's been there since 1893. Very famous bar. Amelia Earhart was building a cabin not far from there, and the remains of which you can still see today. But Amelia Earhart used to drink in that bar. Butch Cassidy, of the famous Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, used to drink in that bar until the night he got arrested as he was walking out for stealing horses. And there began his life of crime. There's like 57 different bullet holes in this bar. And, the owner will take you around and show them to you. It's kind of a big deal because of the gunfights they used to have in there.
Totally.
Anyway, the guy that owned it, his name was Jim. I don't remember his last name. He owned it back then. And I went in there one day, and I love history and Western history. And there's a lot of history around where I live. So I was just asking him about the bullet holes and some of the famous outlaws that hung out there and things like that. And somehow he got on the subject of Four Roses. And I said, what's Four Roses? And he proceeded to tell me that for a long time, in this part of the state at least, you couldn't get Four Roses. There were no real distributors for it. Distribution of a lot of things is a little challenging out here. And Four Roses is just, I guess, something that not too many people drank or didn't think they would. Jim was the only one that carried it because he had a friend that evidently worked at the distillery. So he would, regardless of the price, he would carry it. And that's why he gave me the sample. And up until that point, I'd never, ever tasted bourbon.
Really?
I tried, I drank cheap whiskey in high school like every knucklehead kid does.
Right.
And decided early on in my drinking career that was not my beverage of choice. Because, you drink the cheap stuff. You talked about the stuff that falls on the floor or, goes down the drain.
Yep.
That's what I was drinking. They had a little bucket at the end of the distillery floor for guys like me. And I went, I'll never drink that. But when I tasted that Four Roses, Jim over at the Cowboy Bar in Matisse said, no, you got to try it. You got to try it. I tried it and went, ooh, more, please.
Well, I think that's so common for people to get into that mindset that what I had when I was 18 keeps me away from it for way too long. I very similar. You drink it at that age just to have it in your system. Like there's no appreciation for it. And then when you get to find it later, there's so many things in life that like, as you experience everything, you're never going to run out of things to experience. But like you get older and you're like, oh my God, where do I go next? And whiskey is like a wonderful thing because especially with so many distilleries across the country, you can go anywhere right now and get a taste of something that somebody's making that you couldn't have gotten even 10 years ago. It's an interesting time for whiskey.
It is. It's been trending that way for a while now. I dabbled in the beer business as a hobby back in 2011 and 12. And there were very few, at least in this part of the country, there were very few private, independent, small distillers. Now you can't swing a cat by the ass without hitting a private small distillery somewhere, almost like a local brewery. You're seeing now out here, at least, more and more small local distillers. And it's cool, man. You learn and that's the thing I think that attracted me to, Four Roses was the history and the association that I had with that particular location and the history that, came with it. But then you read about it and how it's made, and you learn that it's a much more intricate process than you would think if you didn't know anything about it, which, that's where I was until I got a little bit of an education in Matisse, Wyoming. I'm a graduate from the University Cowboy Bar in Matisse, Wyoming. Yay.
Well, what a place to start your reemergence into bourbon, though. The history behind Four Roses, too, is very interesting, as they almost weren't around anymore. Like they got gobbled up by Seagrams. And then in the 70s and 80s, when there was not really much interest in bourbon, or even further back into like the 50s and 60s, when 007 basically killed bourbon with his martini, Seagrams went the cheap, I don't want to say the cheap route, but they started making a blend, like they started making like they took that Seagram's magic and just started really watering down the whiskey, and Four Roses quickly became like a bottom shelf item. And it might have not been carried there for so long because it wasn't turning a profit and people weren't really buying it. So it kind of fell into obscurity. Cut to another Jim, Mr. Jim Rutledge, who kind of brought it back when the company was sold at the turn of the 2000s. And he realized that they were sending a lot of their bourbon overseas to Japan, and it was selling extremely well. And they were sending over that single barrel, that high concentrated goodness that was what they're making now. And that the blends that they were passing off on the shelf here was getting no traction, where the Japanese stuff was selling super well. So when new ownership came into the mix, he was like, hey, it's doing well there. Let's bring it back across the pond and bring it back to America, and we'll start doing the same thing here. And that was when Brent actually started with the company, was around that 2004 era. So he got to be mentored by Jim Rutledge, who is So he kind of sits under the learning tree at the beginning of the Four Roses expansion. And that takes us to where we are now, where the single barrel, put it that 35% rye, I'd put it up against anything on the market right now, because it really is that damn good.
Well, speaking of which, I'm going to crack one.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Because I would feel silly if I didn't.
I've been politely waiting.
We're here talking about bourbon and specifically Four Roses, and I'm not even imbibing. But imbibe I shall. Well, here's to Jim and Brent and all the fine folks at Four Roses.
Yes, indeed. Cheers, sir.
Ooh.
It's just good, isn't it?
Ooh.
He was that 35, you're going to get that spiciness. That 35% rye is really what has made this bourbon stand out on the market for so long, because while other distillers were kind of fighting the rye, they leaned into it and they brought that spiciness to the forefront at a time when a lot of consumers didn't understand that they were going to like it. Like, he trusted his product. He knew he was putting out something good and that the people would find it.
Why would distillers shy away from rye? What was the issue with it?
It's kind of interesting. Your consumer is really geared towards a sweeter, less burn product. So take like a Buffalo Trace, which is like a 90 proof. It's very smooth. It's almost creamy with its weediness, and that's what they go for. The rye is sort of, if you will, like a sophomore or junior sip, as it's not your entry level bourbon. So that rye is going to make it spicier. It might make it a little hotter. It might make it a little more burn.
God, that's a fun though, man.
Right? Right.
Come on.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And for the person that's just like kind of a noob to the whole thing, they're drinking it just so, hey, look at this. There's a lot of people. Look at this bottle that I got. I got this bottle. And they don't really, they're not appreciating the specifics of the whole thing. Where once you get to something like this, and once you get that burn, because I think this guy's coming in, I mean, he's 100 proof. So you're getting your burn with this guy, but it's still not like 120 or 130. So you're getting burn, but not too much burn. It is a solid second or third level up from where people start. And I think that's kind of where the interestingness of this one comes in.
I learned something new today. I'm very excited about this already. We're only 20 minutes in and already I'm learning something. This is awesome.
Well, it's if you're a history buff, bourbon is just so chock full of all of it because it is ingrained in Americana. I mean, you go back to like James E. Pepper. He was distilling for the Revolutionary War. Like, he was making whiskey for the troops. And then you go Prohibition. A lot of people had to start. The parallels to today's life is kind of interesting because during the Prohibition era, they had to start. Are you sick? Well, I can write you a prescription for whiskey. And what does that remind you of today?
I don't know, but if that was going on today, they'd be mandating that you had to take whiskey. You'd have guys showing up to your house in a whiskey truck going, have you had your whiskey today? Right? It is mandatory. It'll make you feel better. That would have been horrible.
No. I mean, I think that's how a lot of us got through last year. There's two things that I stand by. If the whiskey had run dry and the internet had gone down, 2020 would have been pandemonium, far more so than it was.
Or maybe not.
Like maybe we
I don't know that the internet's been much of an asset over the last 12 or 18 months.
A fair point. I just meant the distraction aspect of the internet.
Oh, okay.
But to your point, if the internet had gone down, maybe everybody would have just gone outside and done something with their hands instead of TikToking.
God, can you imagine? This country would, the only people moving around would be 50 and over. Because kids are like 20, 30, 15, 18, 20, even 30 years old, wouldn't know how to function. He couldn't even function.
I was thinking of that. Like if things had gone further south, like say this really did turn into the apocalypse, what would people have done? Because you know what the apocalypse isn't going to need? Project managers. They're not going to need people that are very, very good at PowerPoint.
Or influencers.
No. You need butchers. You like
That's
pencils?
Right.
There's not going to be a pencil left when the apocalypse gets here because nobody knows how to make them.
I never thought of that. That's true. Think of all the things that we don't make here anymore.
And nobody's going to know. Like
nobody's going to know how to make it. How do we do that? I don't know. Call the Chinese. They stole it from us. Maybe they still have the records.
And you're going to have to get the blueprints by like courier pigeon or something because the email train is down. That was the first thing I did when I planted a garden. I rebuilt my deck. Like all I wanted to do, like, okay, if we're going to be home, let's do something productive with it. Let's not just, I want to start the TikTok read a book challenge. Hashtag read a book. It's going to be the most boring TikTok ever. It's just going to be somebody reading The Old Man and the Sea. Okay.
You wait, somebody's going to do that. And you're going to be reading about them. They're going to have 15, 18 million bucks in the bank, and they're going to be challenging Mike Tyson to a fight. It's going to happen. All from reading a book.
Hey, if reading a book can trigger a Logan Paul, Mike Tyson, whatever that would be, then actually, I don't know. I got to get in there somehow and make some cash off of this. Maybe I'll Don King the whole thing.
There you go.
But you know a lot about promotions. Segue. You coming from your background, like everybody always comes at you hard with wrestling questions. I'm fascinated by your build up to executive producer. Like you started off with first you were making the board game, right? Like wasn't that your first foray into the AWA?
Oh, so good. Yeah, indirectly. A friend of mine and I had, he was Japanese. He was born in Japan, same age as me. He lived in Tokyo. I grew up in Detroit. He left Japan and I left Detroit about the same times in our lives. So one night, he and I were sitting in a bar somewhere and just chatting, about things in general. His name's Sonny. I said, Sonny, what did you do for fun when you were a little kid growing up in Tokyo? Because where I lived, it was a lower economic kind of environment. We didn't have a lot of money, let's put it that way. So you had to find ways to entertain yourself as a kid. There's no problem. We had a blast. But I was curious what Sonny did in Japan. And what Sonny told me is that when they were little kids, I used to run around, and evidently in Japan at the time, at least in the part of the city where Sonny lived, they would deliver milk bottles to your house. And oftentimes people would screw the milk bottle cap off and it either discarded or somehow it would end up on the street or in a trash, whatever. And these kids would go around the neighborhood scouring, the ground looking for these milk bottle caps. And they would collect them and then they would chase each other around like they were ninjas throwing those little pointed stars at each other. And if you got hit, you were out. Simple game.
Right.
And it was very similar to what my friends and I did in Detroit. We used to play we call it playing army, and we'd throw rocks and clumps of dirt at each other. And if a rock hit you or a clump of dirt hit you, then you're out. So I found that interesting. And then by the end of the night, after several rounds of whatever it was we were drinking, it wasn't Four Roses because I didn't have any money then either. But we had like 25 bar napkins around the table, and we had sketched out this game called Ninja Star Wars. And essentially what it was is you get a game in the box and you'd get a felt vest and I'd get a felt vest. You put it over your head. There's little Ninja Warrior silk screen on the front. And this is back in the 80s when Karate Kid was hot. So of course we had the headband like that.
Of course.
The little face shield that went down so you didn't lose an eye. And then you'd get 3 big white Velcro stars and 3 red ones. So you'd be white and I'd be red, and whoever got 3 stars on them first died.
Totally.
I guess an animated ninja action game death, but nonetheless, you lose.
You're out.
So we decided to embark on that journey, and we begged, borrowed, stole, bounced checks. I did just about everything legal I could possibly do to get the money. We had about 5,000 of these games made over in Korea, because the cost of producing 100 games was a little bit more than the cost of producing 5,000. So of course you'll get 5,000 games.
How
so
did
they finally
you know?
get shipped to the
How did
United
you know to
States.
do that? How could you find Korea in the 80s? Like, how did you know to reach out to them?
We went through a martial arts equipment manufacturer in Chicago who knew some game manufacturers in Korea. That's how we made the connection, because we're both, Sonny and I, we knew each other because of martial arts. I was a black belt, competed as a pro kickboxer for a couple fights, fought as an amateur all over the country, and so did Sonny. So that's how we knew of each other, and why we went to a martial arts equipment manufacturer. Anyway, we get all these games shipped to our house, and I didn't realize how much space 5,000 games eats up.
Right,
but it's a shit ton. I had boxes of games stuffed in my neighbor's garage, in my garage, my parents' garage. People across the street, I hardly knew them, but I knew that they weren't home very often, so I stuffed them in their garage. And I was like, okay, how do we sell these things? Didn't even think about that. We're just convinced we're going to be millionaires. We just didn't know how. So I came up with the idea of reaching out to Vern Gagne in the AWA and saying, hey, Vern, I have all these games. If I shoot the commercial and we air it on your show, because back then Vern's show was on ESPN Monday through Friday. Said, I'll run the commercial on your show. We sell a game. I've already paid for them. It's $20. You get 10, I get 10. Off we go.
How old were you when
he liked
this was
the idea.
happening?
And he ended up hiring me about a month or two later because of the sales thing. He felt that I had an ability to sell, which I guess is true.
That's amazing. How old were you when this was happening? Because you were showing an entrepreneurship that, like, I'm interested to know how old you were. You sound like you were much older than you probably were.
I was by then I would have been 31.
Okay. And you were able to do all of this. I think the thing that's blowing me away a little bit is I think most people, if they did not, how do I get in touch with the AWA? I don't know. And then they would stop. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you had to look up information. You had to figure out how to get it produced overseas.
Yeah, because the internet wasn't around then. I just went,
Yeah, that's what
I have to use my fucking head. I got to think. Oh, my gosh.
I love it, though.
What a concept.
And I think that's what so many people are missing right now is, like, you get one little roadblock and you stop. Right. And to get anything done, there's going to be like 30,000 roadblocks between you and what you're trying to accomplish. You just have to start beating them away.
Just knock them out. It's just, and you're right. I don't know anybody who went, hey, I have an idea, cut to a $10 million mansion in a private jet. You get your butt kicked, for years along the way, no matter what business you're in, unless you win a lottery ticket.
Exactly.
We always know, and we hear how those turn out all the time. So it's maybe better that you go through those challenges.
Well, I think those challenges are what builds the that internal fortitude that'll help you once you actually reach the goal to not turn into one of those lottery ticket winners that buy a helicopter, not understand they're going to have to pay taxes on said helicopter next year. So you get your foot in the door with the AWA that way, and the parallels here are so similar to whiskey. People, I think, they think whiskey is like two guys get drunk together in their garage and say to themselves, we're going to start a distillery, and then cut to bottle on the whiskey store shelf. Like, it's just like anything. There's going to be, I've got a friend right now, she's starting her own label. She calls me the other day. I won't tell you how many thousands of dollars she's already in. And it's not even at the get close to your shelf stage yet. It's just, you got to think about the distilling cost, which is the minimal. You got to think about how much it costs for the barrels, to put it in the barrel, to store the barrels, to bottle it. And they tax every step of the way. It's what goes into the thing that you like is so much more complex than actually enjoying it, or the thought process of how it gets made. And I think television programs are very similar to that, in that people, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about your transition from a PA at the AWA to executive producer at WCW, because that wasn't just a overnight thing. Like, you put in the time and you learned what you were doing, and you were the secondary commentator for the backstage segments, and like really honed your craft before you were put in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic because when Vern Gagne hired me in the AWA, the first 3 or 4 years I spent in the wrestling business, because I think I left there in 91, Vern was already in kind of a financial death spiral. It was a slow spiral, right? But it was a spiral nonetheless. He was in the middle of a big lawsuit with the state of Minnesota. Minnesota had claimed eminent domain on an extremely valuable piece of property that Vern owned in Minnesota. They wanted to make a park out of it, and Vern had been living there for the 20 years and planned to live out the rest of his life there. So being the stubborn Minnesotan that he was, he spent his personal fortune on attorneys fighting the state of Minnesota and lost.
Yeah.
And as a result, they couldn't hire qualified people. So if they needed somebody when they hired me, they needed me for sales and syndication. It was basically getting their show on the air in different parts of the country. And they couldn't hire somebody that was experienced or knew what they were doing because they'd have to pay that person.
Right.
Me, I was like, well, working in the wrestling business, $600 a week. I got 2 kids at home, wife. Sure, I'll figure that out, And because Vern didn't have the resources to staff his production facility properly, it gave me the opportunity to basically intern at any job that I was interested in. And I got to promote live events. I'd never done that before. I had no experience doing that. Nobody would have ever hired me to take on that responsibility. But since it had to be done and Vern couldn't afford anybody else, guess what? I got the shot. Well, you learn from those experiences and you build upon what you learn and you do it over and over and over again to get to the part where you go, okay, I at least understand that. I may not be great at it, but I really understand this part of it. The same thing happened with the post-production side of Vern's operation. I didn't even know how television worked. I bet you if I asked you right now to explain to me how your microwave works and why it makes your food hot, you, like 99.5% of the United States, couldn't tell me. People won't know. They just use it. It works. Right. Shit, put it in, press a button, boom, it's hot coffee, wonderful. But people didn't know how it worked. Well, I felt the same way about a television. I grew up with television. I'm a product of the 50s and the 60s. Television was the centerpiece of my family's life.
Yep.
It was the most communal thing that we did. And I didn't know how the damn thing worked, but I was 31 years old. So I went, I'm going to figure this shit out. By the way, can I swear on this podcast or is this
fuck yes.
Okay. Scared. I should always ask before I start, right? Not like in the middle. You're sitting here thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to edit this thing till midnight.
No. You're fine. You're fine. Very simply, I'll press the little explicit language button on it before I publish it and it'll be absolutely perfect.
But my point was I got to learn a lot before I got to WCW, so that by the time I came to WCW, it was kind of a backup to the backup announcers. I already had more experience in syndication, which is ads in the ad sales component of it. I understood how the business of television worked. I understood how live event promotion worked. I had a basic, not thorough understanding, but a very good understanding, beyond fundamental understanding of the post-production and the production process of how you get a show on the air. So by the time I got to WCW, I had a pretty well-rounded experience. I got hired as an announcer, but I was an announcer with probably a broader base of experience than 75% of the executives that were in the company that hired me.
Especially at that time, right? Because it was sort of the revolving door of different people in charge at that period in time with the company.
Yeah, it was a very new, Ted Turner really created WCW in 1989. I don't think it really hit the air till the end of 89. And I got hired in late 99 So it was still a relatively new company. And, it was only about 6 years old or 7 years old when I ultimately became president of it.
And now, how did that happen? Like because you have I'm trying to get to the entrepreneurial side of it, because who were the other people that were competing with you for that? And how did you go from, because at that point you weren't the secondary commentary guy, you had moved up, you were like the second, you weren't the main commentary, you were still the backstage guy, but you were on television often, like you were still on almost every episode. But for the people that were vying for the job, how were you able to sidestep them and say, no, me?
It's a great question. And the answer to it is that when Bill Shaw, let me back up a minute. There was a guy who was basically running WCW who I worked for. His name was Bill Watts. Bill Watts came in to WCW, made a lot of big claims about all the things he was going to do and how well it was going to work. And it was horrible. Morale was horrible. Bill said and did a few things in the media that was really embarrassing for the entire Turner organization, especially Ted Turner. So Bill Watts wasn't long for this world, or that world. Well, before Bill Watts got fired, because it was such a miserable environment, even though I was under contract and I was making good money, I made up my mind that I was going to leave WCW when my contract was up. And I think it would have been up in 6 months or a year. I told my wife, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not fun. And if I can't have fun in wrestling, then I shouldn't be in it.
Right.
So I had been making plans to leave. And part of those plans was me creating with a friend of mine, Jason Hervey. He was the little kid on the Wonder Years.
Right.
He and I were working together and creating this action game show for kids. That was going to be my ticket out of WCW. Now it was a wrestling theme because that's what I knew, but it would have had nothing to do with WWF or WCW. We wouldn't have needed any licensed characters, but it was very much a professional wrestling themed kids live action game show.
Which for the time frame would have been perfect.
Huh?
For the time frame, that would have worked really well.
No, and we pitched it to Fox, because back then Fox had a children's strip on Saturday mornings, like from 8 till noon.
Yep.
It was all kids programming, and they were looking at it closely for that. So I went out and pitched it, got a little bit of traction at Fox in Hollywood, made up my mind that as soon as my WCW gig is up, I'm going to head out to California and, take a swing at Hollywood and see what happens. Well, Bill Watts gets fired, and I find out that the guy who's coming in to run WCW in the interim, his name was Bill Shaw. He was the VP of Human Resources for Turner Broadcasting. Super guy. He came in and said, all right, told WCW, Ted's about ready to pull the plug. We're going to take one more run at this. We're going to do things differently, which was music to my ears. Why would you do the same thing that you've been doing if you're getting your ass kicked doing it, right?
Right.
Bill said, no, we're going to take a different approach. I went, I wonder what that means. And he said, we're going to hire an executive producer, somebody that understands television more than they understand wrestling. Because heretofore, all of the wrestling people, for the most part, that were really calling the shots didn't really understand the television industry. And a lot of television executives that only understood television didn't really understand the wrestling industry. So it was funky. And when Bill said that, I went, I'm going to throw my name in a hat and see what happens. My wife said, really? I said, yeah, I'm going to see. I mean, if I could be the executive producer and start having some control over things, absolutely. So I threw my name in the hat. Now, this is where the entrepreneurial part comes in. And you'll learn in a very short order, Jesse, that asking me a question is a journey.
I love it. That's exactly what I wanted to talk. No, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. This is wonderful.
And so I went in for my first meeting with Bill Shaw to interview for the position of executive producer. And he said, okay, amongst other things, I'm paraphrasing the whole meeting, but it was essentially, all right, what would you do differently to grow the WCW brand that hasn't been done yet? I said, I'm glad you asked. So I pulled up, I had a big art folder with all of the storyboards for the show that I had just pitched to Fox Network. I said, I'm glad you asked that. Here's where I would start, Bill. And about 72 hours later, I had the job.
Oh my, just right place, right time. You were already prepared for something else you were working on. He didn't know that was for a different show. You came out looking like $1 million with storyboards and just like the most professional dude in the world. And boom, you get it.
No, but I did tell him, because he asked me, he says, did you do, because I couldn't put I mean, it was really, really well done.
Right. I
mean, it had 3-dimensional things you could pop out, so you could see the rain. I mean, it was really well done. I spent a fortune on it, by the way. I could have never done it. And I think Bill knew that. So where did you get that? And I told him, I said, well, I'm using it for another presentation. I'm pitching it to Fox Network. And he went, what? I said, yeah. I mean, and I told him the whole story, just like I told you. I'm on my way out the door, Bill. If this doesn't work, I'm heading to Hollywood.
That's awesome. And that too, there's so many lessons here, I think, for people to pull out. Like, there's no reason to not put your cards on the table in certain scenarios. Like, don't do it every time. But in that scenario, you had nothing to lose by telling him what you had coming up because you already knew where you were going.
No, and I think it's more than that. They're not to get heavy here, but
no, please.
I've found, because I've been in sales in one form or another my entire life. And too often in sales, especially as you're learning sales, you compromise your integrity. Sometimes you're not even knowing you're really doing it, but not being aware enough that you shouldn't be. So you kind of go through the motions and you convince people to do things that may or may not be in their best interest or the best opportunity or whatever the case may be. And I've done that. By the way, I'm not immune to that either. I did that. And I never felt good about myself. It's like I didn't care how much money I made. I just felt like a schmuck.
Right.
I wasn't proud of my job. I wasn't excited to go to work. I was excited to get the check in the mail, but I didn't like the gig. And I've found that now when I'm pitching something, because I've got projects going all over the place. I've got a movie I'm doing with Netflix. I've got a digital game that I'm developing. I got a ton of stuff going on. But in all of those discussions, meetings, and everything else, I just lay my shit on the table. Here's what it is. Here's my motivation. If this sounds like a fit, great. If it doesn't, thanks for the meeting. And my odds are way better.
And you're going to sleep better.
People appreciate that.
Yeah. And you're going to sleep well at night knowing that you're doing what you should be doing. It's similar to comedy where a lot of people, when they're getting started, they don't have their voice yet. Like they're trying to be whoever inspired them to get started. And you can normally pick that out. And what you were saying a moment ago about how you don't really always feel good about yourself because you know when you're selling out a little bit. Yep. There are crowds where, it's this, it takes a while to get past this, but it's this kind of crowd. And you try to like completely shift your entire demeanor to make yourself fit into that crowd's mold. And you that's not long for this world. Like every bit of performing is interacting with the crowd and feeling them and feeling them out. But you have to have that piece of yourself that you're putting out there that's genuine, or else they recognize pretty quick that you're faking your way through it and you lose them at the 20-minute mark. So it takes a long time, but you finally learn, be yourself, do the thing that you, same with wrestling. What does everybody say? You've got to be that version, that heightened version of yourself where you turn it to like 11. And it's the same for comedy. If you don't, you're going to end up some dude faking it through a set and the crowd will pick up on it halfway through.
Isn't there a technique or a philosophy in comedy where the best comedy is an exaggeration taken to 11 or something like that? Is it like an improv formula of some kind?
1,000%. So many of the stories I tell on stage, they start with something that happened in real life. And then once it's grounded in reality, you can exaggerate it to the nines. To anybody listening to this, I promise you, my daughter don't talk like this right here. I promise you that. Which will bother some people, but come on, did you really think she did?
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, this is a little secret. I've never shared this with anybody. I think my wife kind of knows, but deep down inside, I've always wanted to try stand-up comedy. So you've just inspired me to tell a personal story. And this one happens to be a lady that was sitting next to me on a flight and passed gas for about 3 hours. And I was scared to death that she thought it was me, but it was actually her. And I was panicking the whole time. I kept thinking to myself, he who smells a Delta. He who smells a Delta. So I can't even go, what's wrong with you? It's like, God, I'm trapped. Anyway, I think I got my material. Let's go.
Well, you've got the format too, because there's already like a defined show that if you were to go out on the road, A, you've got an audience, so you'd get booked easily. B, you take the Foley approach and you put jokes between stories, between jokes, between stories, and blend the line between the two. You'd be fine. You'd be on the road selling out in no time.
Hey, if it wasn't for the fact that I never want to leave my house again, that would be fun.
It was weird. It was definitely weird getting back out there because you do get very comfortable with where you are, especially after last year. But you've been in front of more people than I have. There's that energy that comes with it when you're performing in front of a large group of people, which is unlike anything else ever anywhere.
You're right. It's addictive. It's mentally and emotionally addictive. And I think it's one of the reasons, like, why do the Rolling Stones still tour? Not because they need the cash. Why does Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, still tour.
It's that adulation.
Why do all these bands that never have to ever think about leaving their property ever again still go out and tour? Because you can't get that fix in any other way. You can't buy it with money. You can't get it.
That's
so
1,000%.
It's one of the reasons, and I think it's one of the reasons why, boxers never go out on top, rarely go out on top.
Right.
Conor McGregor last night.
First thing I thought
he had
of.
every opportunity to go out on top.
Mm-hmm. It's hard though.
And he didn't need the money. He's got $500 million in the bank. For God's sake, you don't need the cash. Just call it a day, man, and go out on top. But you can't, because you're addicted to the rush. You're not addicted to the money. You're addicted to the rush.
Do you think he's addicted to the character? Like he's got that. He's almost got that nature boy thing going on, where like he's living the gimmick a little bit right now.
Oh, he loves every minute of it. He loves the attention. He's great at it.
He's wonderful at it.
And he's, there's a reason he has $500 million in the bank, and it's because he is so good at it. Mm-hmm. He's got his own whiskey.
Yep.
I think it's called Proper Irish, or
Proper Number 12.
Proper Number 12. So yeah, but he regardless of all that, he'll still keep doing it, I think. Now maybe, breaking your leg on national television. And
then the bang bang at the end of it probably wasn't his best moment in terms of on-air character.
No, he took it a little too far. Some of the stuff he said about about his opponent's wife was just okay. I'm a wrestling guy and I was offended. Come on. How could that happen? We set people on fire and it's okay.
To be fair, though, she should have known a little bit better than to DM him leading up to a fight, even if it was completely to say, hey, could you tone it down a little bit? Or, hey, could you just, I'm being a person here saying hello. That anything in this day and age that you can screen grab and make money off of, she should have probably known a little bit better than to reach out to him.
Yeah, but how do you know that was just an innocent DM? You're assuming it was.
Well, that's where the storylines come in.
We don't know, do we?
I think he's made for wrestling. Make as much money.
He's too little, though. You could pick him up and put him in your pocket.
That's the only thing against him. Like, you can't, he can't Lesnar crossover, because the only people he can go up against are going to be, I don't know, him versus AJ Styles. That could make money. That could make a lot of money. Mysterio?
That's it.
Yeah.
Nothing else. I shouldn't say that.
Well, I mean, look at the Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash dynamic. They, big and little.
Yeah, but they both knew how to work. Here's the thing.
True.
They both knew how to, they both understood the dance and had a dance card, a catalog of dances that they could dance together. You take a guy like Conor McGregor or any other, legit combat fighter, and you say, okay, now forget all the stuff you know.
Forget your instincts.
All the stuff you don't know that you're going to have to get good at.
Mm-hmm.
It can look really, really bad.
We've seen that
really bad.
When
and
they
then
brought,
you got the size that, Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash. Sure, I had Rey Mysterio wrestle Kevin Nash. It was some of the best stuff we've done. It was believable. It was David and Goliath, but they both knew how to tell that story physically in the ring in a way that the audience would buy into it. But you take a little guy that's a legit badass, and maybe you could knock, Roman Reigns out in a fight. I don't think so, but maybe, let's just say maybe. You put them in a match where you're telling a story that's going to be just ass rash ugly.
Yeah. And they've seen that. It's been tried. They brought in, what's his name, a few years ago. Kane. It doesn't matter.
Kane Velasquez.
I can't remember his name. That's how well it worked. And so to your point, you can't train for something your entire life and then turn that instinct off to learn something a step to the left, Well,
but they're two different things. It's like,
exactly.
You're a great stand-up comic, but you might not be such a good tenor at the opera.
Right. I'm actually
you're
a
both
lovely
entertainers.
baritone.
Come on, you're both entertainers. Come on,
Right.
You're both up in front of people all the time. You should be able to just make that crossover. Two different things.
Mitch Hedberg had this wonderful bit about that where he says you train your entire life to be a very good comic, and then the first thing people want to know is, can you write? He's like, it's like, if
but don't you write your comedy?
I do write my comedy, but it's like if you trained your entire life to be a very good chef, and then somebody immediately went, you can chef, but can you farm? Like that.
I get it.
I always loved that. But the beauty of comedy is, yes, you do have to be a writer as well. And that was my foray into it. I had a sketch group, and we got tapped by a subsidiary of Universal to write we were doing promos for MTV2 at the time. And we got tapped to write 2 sitcoms. And, you spend your time and you put your time into the sitcom and you get to the pitch. And as soon as we get to the pitch, they go, Super Troopers had just broken all of these records for what sketch comics doing a movie could do. So during the pitch, they stop us at the beginning and go, we see you guys in a movie. Can you come back in 7 days with a movie script instead of the 2 sitcoms that you've spent the past 6 months writing? Can you do that? And what do you say? You're like, of course we can.
Sure.
Working 24 hours around the clock trying to put together storyboards for a movie based off a character that we only kind of understood. It goes everywhere, and you got to pivot. And I think that's what I've always liked about your career is that you have been wonderful at pivoting. Like you had Hervey Bischoff, was it Bischoff Hervey or Hervey Bischoff Entertainment? Bischoff Hervey.
It was Bischoff Hervey. Come on, the B comes before the H.
I know.
And listen, the only reason I've been really good at pivoting is because I can't hold down a job.
Me and you
pivot or die.
Me and you have so much in common. So you start Bischoff Hervey, and that was one of the things I wanted to pick your brain about, because just like whiskey, how you put together a television show, I think people do believe it is you have an idea and then it becomes a reality. Like, what are the steps between you want to do Scott Baio is 40 and getting it on the air?
Well, we'd be here till tomorrow morning talking about this, but essentially, you got to know what the market is looking for. Part of being successful as an independent television producer is knowing what the buyers are looking for 6 months from now,
right?
Or a year from now. A year from now is even better, because if you have an idea where they're looking and what they want to do, then you can take that kind of general intelligence, if you will, and distill it down and match it up to your Rolodex, either your Rolodex of ideas or your Rolodex of characters or celebrities or whatever the case may be, actors, actresses. So in our case with Scott Baio, for example, Jason Hervey and Scott Baio had been friends since they were teenagers,
right?
And good friends. And we knew that VH1 was heavily invested in celebriality. That's what they called it back then, celebriality. And they were looking for a Scott Baio era male who was not quite through that first phase of life yet in terms of, making a commitment.
Right.
And Scott Baio was a perfect candidate and a super great guy to work with and easy to work with. So we said, hey, Scott, would you be interested in, being single and talking about all the crazy stuff he used to do in Hollywood and recreating some of those things? And because Scott's a cool guy with a lot of confidence, he said, yeah, sure. So we just started putting pieces together. And that's really what it is. My daughter's in the business too. She's a director of creative at a Warner Media company. And she just left here. And we were talking about, putting shows together and pitching shows and getting something on the air. And it's even a more difficult challenge now than it was back when I was doing it. Back when I was doing it, if we had a great idea and we could package the right talent and get it all laid out, I could sit down with you if you were a buyer and present that idea and get a decision within a month or two, maybe.
Right.
The paperwork associated would take another month or two, and then we'd be scheduling production. There are shows now my daughter has that are 3 years old and still haven't gotten to the pitch phase yet. The process is it's a cover your ass process is what it is. It's a risk adverse industry now.
It's not creative forward.
So it's like working in a bank. No, it's like working for the government. Everything takes forever.
Just bureaucratic nightmare.
But back when we were doing it, we just come up with an idea or listen, keep your ear to the ground, kind of get an idea what people are looking for and just scramble to see if you can put those pieces together, either through the relationship you already have or relationships you can get through other people in the industry, like your agents and things like that.
Right. even doing this show, I've learned that those relationships are super key in terms of, one of my main rules has just been, don't be a dick. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing how far you can get by not being a dick. It really is. If be polite and be straightforward with what you're trying to accomplish when you reach out to the person. It's probably way oversimplifying it, but it's been working for me.
Not really.
We can't talk without acknowledging that it is the 25th anniversary of the NWO. That is
still.
Yeah,
we've been celebrating this for a week. My God, I can't take it anymore.
Well, I will not bore you with questions that you've gotten 1,000 million times. I will just ask, did you know it would be this big 25 years later? Like, it's mind-boggling that 25 wrestling has a long memory and a short memory at the same time. And for you to have been at the catalyst, or you have been the catalyst for something that has lasted that long, I mean, you have to kind of wow when you think about it.
Oh, of course. Time is such a abstract thing, can really screw with your head if you let it. So right. I was thinking about this the other day. If somebody would have told me back in May of 96, when this all started, that 25 years from now, people are going to be calling me and asking me about the beginning of it all, I just would have laughed.
Right.
I would have made some excuse to leave the room as quickly as I could. No, I had no idea. I knew it was, we could feel early on that we had a successful storyline. I thought, man, if we get lucky, we can get 6 months out of this.
Right.
Maybe longer. Maybe. If we get really lucky. Cut to 25 years later, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash are still each getting 6-figure royalty checks from NWO merchandise.
Is that not insane? I heard Scott Hall say that, and I was like, that is the best compliment you as a creator can receive, is that your star pupils are still getting 6 figures based off of that idea.
You know what's funny? And I know, you live in Four Horsemen country.
I do.
And I'm friends with Arn and very good friends with Rick. But I'm going to say this anyway. It's like, bitches. People always go, Four Horsemen, way better, clique, as they call it, or faction, I say, really? How much revenue has Four Horsemen merchandise generated in the last 20 years? It's a fraction of what the revenue that NWO merchandise created last month.
Right.
So,
what they did? I mean, obviously, storylines. The Four Horsemen, the thing that everybody knows them for, is free. That is a free thing that anybody can do. Hold up the 4 fingers and go woo. Their T-shirts were never. Don't get me wrong. I probably had one, but the NWO merchandise for that time period, for that. Entry to what became the Attitude Time of Wrestling, every dude and a lot of the girls wanted to be a part of that merch, and they bought it. And here we are going down the rabbit hole that I said I wouldn't do. As I was thinking about it, and as I was rewatching a lot of the things that people have said about it, everybody asks the same questions, and the same talking points are covered. The one thing that I have not heard about from this time period is the fun you guys had to have been having behind the scenes. Like, everybody talks storyline and everybody talks about, like, this guy leaves and that guy comes in, etc. Red, black, white, whatever. You guys must have been having a ball. Like, do you have any good drinking stories from that period of time? Do you have any good roads? It doesn't even have to be drinking stories. Do you have any good road stories from that period of time that doesn't even have to do with the NWO? Maybe it's just something where you're all on top of the world and enjoying it.
What's funny is, all of us would arrive at the building. Of course, I was part of the on-camera NWO thing, but I was also the boss.
Right.
So my relationship with the talent wasn't the same as the talent's relationship to the talent.
Right.
Now,
right.
I hung out with them, but it was different when I did, right? Because
you're the boss.
I'm still the guy that makes the decisions about how much money they make or don't. So it is what it is. Now, we would all get together. We would have a blast backstage, although most of the time, especially early on. But that creative process amongst highly talented, competitive, sometimes insecure people, most performers are,
all of
being honest with themselves. Oftentimes got to be real challenging the night of. But when it was time, when the show was over and you knew you hit it out of the park, it's like all that tension went away. You'd be backstage. We'd have it's like rock and roll, whatever. One of the rooms would have whatever you wanted to drink in there. And we'd all hang out at the building for just a half hour after the show, because everybody was anxious to get back to the hotel. It was 11 o'clock at night. You'd been at that building since 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a long day. And we get back to the hotel. And back then, Monday Nitro, it ended at 11, and then the replay started at 11:05.
Right.
So we could all rush back to the hotel and get to the hotel bar and watch the replay, because when you're actually doing the show, you didn't get a chance to see it. You're doing it. You don't know what it looks like. You think it looks good, but you don't know because you're doing it, right? So we'd all go back to the hotel, and that's where everybody kind of got together. And there was a period like 96, 97, early 98, the camaraderie, and just, as Van Morrison would say, the crack was good. Google it. It was a fun time. And then, as time went on, it got less fun, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I don't have any road stories. I do have several Learjet stories. None of them
just hike the road
up to the expectations of some of them you've heard. But oftentimes when we would leave Nitro, I would just charter a jet, and it was more often than not Hulk, Randy Savage, myself, depending on who else was on the show, 3 or 4 other guys, and yeah, we drank a lot on those flights. We drank a lot. And by the way, there's no bathroom. We fly a little Lear 25.
Oh, so you're stuck.
No bathroom, 2.5-hour flight.
And booze.
Barely make weight and balance on takeoff because of the amount of alcohol that was in the back of the plane. Yeah, it was fun.
I can only imagine the amount of brothers that you would hear. I guess you could play the brother drinking game if you were hanging out with both Hogan and Savage at the same time.
God, those were fun times, though. Oh, and Roddy Piper. Oh, was he fun to have a cocktail with?
Oh,
I miss Roddy. I miss all those guys. I'm still tight with Hulk. Hulk and I talk regularly, but I obviously miss Randy, and Roddy. There's a lot of people I miss. Too many, actually.
Too many. Rowdy Roddy was always one of my favorites. My dog's named Piper for that reason. I mean,
good for you.
And the other dog, I've got 2 chocolate labs, and people that listen to this are probably tired of hearing this, but my other lab is named, we call him Rocky, but he's registered at the vet as Dwayne Johnson, because it just tickles me to death when I hear the vet go, "Oh, I'm afraid Dwayne Johnson has worms. We're going to have to give him a shot." And I laugh, and they don't know why I'm laughing. And it's the little things,
Oh, that is just too funny. If you hear me tell this story about your story on my podcast, please don't be offended.
No, I will not at all. I will take it as a compliment.
Oh, that's funny.
On that note, I have kept you for just over an hour, good sir. There was one thing, and I sometimes you do things to pop the boys in the back. We were talking about things to talk to you about, and I'm shooting down this and I'm shooting down that. And somebody goes, "Well, you got to come up with a cocktail to celebrate the NWO." And I'm like, "Oh, no, let's not. Okay, what's your idea?" And he goes, "Well, an NWO old fashioned. It would be an old fashioned that you put chocolate bitters in." And I'm like, "All right, I'll bite. Why do you put chocolate bitters in the old fashioned?" And he goes, "Because it'll make it just too sweet." And I was like, that is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm going to say it. I'm going to tell him just to see the eye roll.
I kind of like it. I'm thinking about trying it. I gotta go Google the internet and figure out how to make an old fashioned.
Oh, I'll shoot you a recipe. A chocolate bitters old fashioned is actually delicious. I was just giving Brian a hard time because sometimes you like to give Brian a hard time.
Yeah, we won't call it an old fashioned. We'll call it old school.
Oh, okay.
Old school. Because now there's something old fashioned. I'm pretty sure both Hulk and Kevin would be pissed.
Oh,
but they'd be cool. They'd be cool with old school. But
I like that.
We named the drink after you guys. It's called the old fashioned. It's like, what?
Right.
Why'd you do that?
Listen here, dude. I love that.
Funny, I'm older than Kevin and just barely about 8 months younger than Hulk. So I'm making fun of myself. It's okay.
I love
Don't cancel me.
I love that. The old school. That is a proper frickin' drink name. And it'll be blackened whiskey because, black and white, and then chocolate bitters for a little bit of sweetness. I love it. I thought that was going to die a horrible death. I like that you like that.
No, and if I learn how to make one of those things, I'll have a sip on the air. I'll give you and your team full credit, and I don't know if you can make any money doing that, but whatever.
Hey, I'll shoot you the recipe. This thing's been awesome just because I'm able to go through. People are bringing me into towns. It's you got to capitalize on everything when you can. They bring me in to do comedy. Then I do a whiskey tasting with people while I'm in town. It's a pretty fun. I mean, it's not as cool as working the road. I'm not on the road. I'm not in a Learjet with Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan, but it's still pretty awesome when you're able to go drink whiskey during the day and then work the club at nighttime.
No, dude, you're modifying the Ron White business model.
Hey, I talked to him a couple weeks ago.
Do you know Casio Kid?
No.
Matt Mitchell from Huntsville.
Matt Mitchell sounds familiar. I don't know Casio
Matt Mitchell
Kid.
From Huntsville. He goes by Casio Kid. He's a DJ there in Huntsville, but he also is a stand-up comic. And he just opened up, I think, with Ron. I think 10 shows he did with Ron recently.
Oh, beautiful.
But yeah, Ron White's my favorite. And I heard from somebody that because my partner Jason Hervey and I actually were reasonably close to doing a reality show with Ron. His wife was kind of, so that never happened. But we got close. We were making progress, and in the process of that, we learned that Ron, he made a fortune doing his stand-up. Mm-hmm. But where he really made his money was after the show. He'd have VIP, cocktail opportunities for some of the guests that cost you $1,000 or $1,500 for 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, damn. And that's, you're not there yet, but you're kind of working your way in that direction.
Yeah.
Whiskey, laughs, money.
And that's what it's all. That's the name of my first book, Whiskey, Laughs, Money. It's cool. I'm in Louisville in September, and I've got the master distillers of Woodford Reserve and the master taster of Old Forester, and they're wanting to come to the show. Like it's, it's a cool feeling when the people that make the thing that you like want to come see the thing that you make.
Especially when you're ready to get, when you're looking for that sponsor.
Oh,
to help offset some of that travel expense and help a little bit with the marketing over here. And
the beauty is I was in marketing in my past life. So way back in the day, I was at the forefront of J. Crew's e-com boom, which I know it's as far away from anything that I'm doing now, but I was able to work with Mickey Drexler. Mickey Drexler being just the frickin' Prince of, what was his title? Prince of Retail, the Market Prince of Retail or something like that. And he was at the forefront of not only the Gap and J. Crew, but taking Steve Jobs's Apple store and relaying out the layout for the stores and things like that. So there were life lessons that you get to, similar to, I'm sure, when you were with the AWA and WCW in those early days, you have to be able to recognize when you're sitting under a proper learning tree. And if there's somebody that is obviously at the top of his game, maybe listen to what he has to say. And you're talking about television and looking at it 6 months to a year out the road. He used to have a quote that I use today. You're not skating to the puck. You're skating where the puck is going. And
you know where that came from?
No.
I hate to break it to you, brother. That was Wayne Gretzky.
Hey, wait, he was a huge hockey fan. I
skate to where the puck is going to be.
Yep. And I have lived by that. Wayne Gretzky, even better, because it was true words today. Speaking of, are you a hockey guy?
No, I hate hockey.
I
like Wayne Gretzky. I don't hate hockey. I don't hate anything. I
either.
Like going to hockey games live.
Right.
That I could get into. I would rather chew off my leg than to watch it on television.
The puck's too small.
Feel the same way about NASCAR. Put me in a seat where I can smell it, I can feel it, I can hear it. It vibrates into the core of my soul.
Right.
And I can drink a beer. I'm in. Put me on a couch watching a box that features cars turning left. No, ain't happening.
My logic has always been that it's so successful on television because as they keep going around in a circle, they're actually hypnotizing you into thinking that it's interesting.
Not me. They're hypnotizing me to get on my motorcycle, my horse, and go for a fucking ride. I can't stand it. I don't know how anybody could spend 3 hours sitting there watching that.
I've never been able to, and I'm from the heart of NASCAR, and
yes,
I probably going to get a phone call from somebody being like, really, man, you don't like it? I'm like, well, if I'm there live, it's wonderful. But if I'm watching it, I'm asleep in 10 minutes or I'm outside doing something else.
No, I get it live. And the same with hockey. I get it live. I get it. Absolutely get it. I just can't, just not on TV.
Well, it loses the magic. Whereas wrestling's one of those things, television amplifies it. Like I love it live as well, but there's something about the editing in wrestling goes a long way.
Well, you get the color and the play-by-play.
Right.
That's the thing that you don't know that you're missing it when you go to a live event or non-televised event. I mean, it's clear, but you don't realize how much the color commentary and play-by-play, the the narrative that supports what you're seeing on television actually enhances it, to your point. But when you go to a non-televised live event and you don't have that additional enhancement or the narrative to kind of support the action, yeah.
Right. You get about 30 minutes in and the novelty wears off. Not exactly. The novelty, but the, oh my God, I'm at a live event wears off. And now all of a sudden, let's go get more beer.
Exactly.
On that note, I will leave you with this. The one of my first instances, and I've got a handful of friends in the wrestling business, not nowhere near at the level of you and your crowd, but like one of my first instances, I won a rock, and this is I was younger, a lot younger. I won a rock impersonation contest, and the only way I won it was because there were two finalists, me and a 9-year-old. So I cut a promo on the 9-year-old and I turn his candy ass sideways and I stick him up his mom's ass and the crowd pops and I get 2 front row tickets to SmackDown. And I bring
that's awesome.
And I bring my buddy Joey and you know, we were your demo. In the year 2000, we would have been right there at that like mark out age. And we go and I tell everybody, I tell my family, I tell everyone that'll listen that I'm going to be sitting right behind Taz and Michael Cole at SmackDown. What I forgot was how drunk you get at live wrestling events. So Joey ends up getting kicked out because he's throwing spitballs at the back of Taz's head.
I love it.
But not the dude you want to piss off. And Taz finally stands up and stares Joey down. Joey was probably about 250 and a former amateur wrestler himself at that time. So he didn't back down. And I'll only remember it for my mom telling me about a week or two later, it looks like you boys had fun.
That's awesome.
Which is, of course, how Mom would tell you were batshit drunk on television, and Grandma called me worried about you. She thinks you have a problem.
I would have put money on your buddy, though. Taz in his day could go, but in 2000, your buddy, amateur wrestler, 250, pissed drunk. Nah, I put my money on your friend.
I've seen Mr. Joey Bird. I'll say his real name. I normally change his name in stories. Joey Bird, I have seen him out wrestle some of the largest, drunkest people, barring Chris Lynch, of anybody I know. And only reason him and Chris Lynch never happened is because they sobered up and realized they were best friends.
Good.
Well, sir, you have given me so much of your time. I normally end the show by asking, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore of whiskey? I guess for this episode, I should change it to, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore of wrestling? And it doesn't have to be wrestlers. It can be promoters. It can be writers. It can be anybody under the spectrum.
I'd have to put Vince McMahon up there first. Yep. I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity that I had at WCW had it not been for Vince McMahon. You got to give credit where credit is due. He's turned the industry into it's a global $5 billion publicly held corporation. And he took a form of entertainment that most people looked down their nose at, didn't take seriously. I mean, within the industry, television industry, didn't take it seriously, thought it was a joke, thought it would never last. And now he's getting $1 billion checks from the largest cable and network, outlets out there. So Vince first. I would go Hogan, because along with Vince, I think Hogan was instrumental in helping to change the perception of wrestling back in the 80s, when it went from being little regional territories and small television studio shows and things like that. Hogan was a large part of the reason that all changed, along with Vince. They worked in tandem. Ric Flair, just because he's endured at the highest of levels, for sure. I think Rock, because he's transcended sports entertainment and really made a big path for a lot of other people like John Cena and Dave Bautista, and probably others to come in the future. So Rock definitely needs to be up there. And Stone Cold Steve Austin. I don't think there's been a better character other than, heel Hulk Hogan in the last 25 years.
It's funny that you say that, because so many times that argument comes up. Who was better at that time, Stone Cold or heel Hogan? And that was both of them at the top of their game during that time period. And just like Vince and Hogan in the 80s, I think the audience being able to see both of them parallel to one another helped both of them grow their individual audiences. Because
and that's it. And the truth is, in someday there's going to be a film that's going to talk about this very thing. But I'm just guessing. I know nothing.
That kid's arms are huge.
But really, that's the story. It's the Hogan McMahon story.
Yeah.
Vince wouldn't have been able to do what he did without Hulk Hogan. But guess what? Hulk Hogan wouldn't have been Hulk Hogan without Vince McMahon.
1,000%.
And it's that, people always, is it him or is it him? Is it, binary, right? It's not binary. It's both, man. They both did it together.
I feel like that's where we are right now. Everybody has to make everything black and white, not recognizing the shades of gray. Sometimes people come together at the right time, and Vince had the idea, Hulk had the persona, Vince had the foresight, Hogan had the body and the charisma. Without one, you couldn't put Andre in Hulk's shoes. Andre couldn't have been Hogan. Andre was Andre. Warrior wasn't Hogan.
Iron Sheik wasn't Hogan. Bruno Sammartino couldn't have been Hogan in his day.
As much as you love Sammartino, he didn't have the 80s that Hogan had in him.
No.
So Vince and Hogan ruling the world at that period in time. And I got to say, you and Hogan in the 90s, had a lot of that same magic. So you had, not blowing smoke, you had something Vince didn't have at the beginning of that run, and you saw the industry changing. Vince saw his control over the industry. You saw the consumer looking for something else, and you leaned into that. When Vince had his heels down in the sand, we're not moving in that direction. Kids buy shit, teenagers don't. And you moved it that way, and you shifted the entire industry. So kudos to you, sir.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
And on that note, I will gush no longer. It has been wonderful drinking whiskey with you, and I'll do it again.
Thank you, sir.
I'll do it again anytime you let me.
Yeah, it's same here. And get that recipe for the old school,
the old
school cocktail.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Cheers, and thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Be well, Jesse.
You as well. All right, guys. What did you think of that, huh? That was Mr. Eric Bischoff on season 3 of the Bourbon Showdown. I'll tell you, I could talk for hours to that guy. I mean, just not even about wrestling, just about television production and what it takes to get a show made. I was fascinated. I hope I did not mark out too strong. I've been a huge Eric Bischoff fan for a long time. I just appreciate everything he's done for the wrestling business, and it was just so good talking to him today. So, Eric, thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you on the show today. Come on back. We'll drink more whiskey. We'll talk more television. We'll talk more wrestling. We'll figure out the world's problems one at a time, and it'll be good watching, good listening. So thank you, sir, for being on the program today. Everybody, come on back next week. You know why? Because we have Michter's on the show. That's right, Michter's Bourbon. We're going to be sipping with Andrea and their master of maturation, and we are going to be talking to her next week. So tune on in next Tuesday when the Bourbon Showdown podcast comes back. My name's Jesse Jones. Until then, raise your glass and kick some ass. I'll talk to y'all on down the road. Have a good one, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.